Welcome to this session on using the building and floor nodes to drive the floor manager. So before I get started, I'm going to come down to the floor selector and open up the floor manager. So the floor manager is a tool within Ecosim Building Designer that sets up all the floor elevations for your building. You can see here we have a default one called Building 1, and it sets up a lobby floor and a couple of office floors and a roof, and it has their floor elevations along with a floor-to-floor height for each of those floors. And we could go in there and modify those floor-to-floor heights or add additional floors and so forth, but it's a fairly manual operation. And then we would apply those changes and close the floor manager, and that would be available from any file within this project workset. But now we're going to do the same thing using the building and floor nodes in GC, and the advantage of that is I can link those to the sliders we created for instance, the lobby height or the guest room floor height or the overall building height, and it will automatically then adjust our floors in the floor manager. So I'm going to go over to the node types. And under the Ecosim Building Designer nodes, I'm going to select the building node and drag that out onto my graph. So before I can create floor nodes, I first need to create a building node. Now there's a couple of different techniques here. So I could say from existing building, that means I could actually create this building node from a building that was already set up in the floor manager, such as that building 1. And that simply means I'm going to read the data from the building manager. In order to change that data, I would still need to open the floor manager and do it manually. We're going to do it a different way. We're going to select Create New Building. So we're actually creating the building, which means now I can drive the building from GC. Now that building node does need a catalog item, a data group catalog item. And there's only going to be one choice here. It's going to be building default. Now we need a base elevation. We're simply going to use 0. And then I need to give that building a name. That's simply the name that will show up within the floor manager. And this particular input is a text string. So text strings are always in quotes. So we're going to call this GC Hotel. And then I'm simply going to go over to my transactions and record that transaction. Then I'll go back to the node types. And now that I have a building created, I can start creating floors. So again, I'm going to drag and drop the floor node onto the graph. I'm going to have several of these, so I'm going to name them, making them easy to find. So I'm going to call this one Floor Lobby. And again, I want to create this floor, so I'm going to use Create at Building as the technique. Again, it needs a catalog item, so we can, again, select Floor Default. Now I need to link it up to an owning building, so that's going to be our Building 1 node. And again, it needs a name, and that should be in quotes. So I'm simply going to name that Lobby. There's one more input that is not actually pinned to the node, and that would be the floor elevation, which would be the arc floor finished floor elevation. Slide that over, I can pin that to the node. And so by default, it's going to be 0, and that's, since this is the lobby, that will be the correct elevation. Now I'm going to select another floor node and put that on the graph. So next we're going to create the guest room floors. Now our guest room floors could vary depending if we change the height of the building or we change the floor-to-floor height on the guest room. So we're going to create these guest room floors as a group of typical floors. So let's start. I'm going to rename this as Floor Guest Rooms. And we're going to use a technique which is Create Typical Floor. And we're just going to go through and start putting in the input. So we need a building. That'll be Building 1. Now we need a typical floor group name. And again, you can see there the type is a string, so that means it has to be in quotes. So we're going to put the quote. and then we'll give it a name, so we'll call it guest rooms, and close the quotes. Enter. Now our base elevation, so that's where we want to start this group of floors. Well, our lobby started at 0, so we essentially need these to start just above the lobby floor. Of course, that's dependent on the height of the lobby floor, which we have a slider or variable to define. So we're actually just going to link that base elevation back to our lobby height node. So if that changes, then the base elevation of the guest room floors will change as well. Then we need to know the number of floors. Well, again, we created that expression node for the number of guest room floors. So we'll link that. Then we have the typical floor height. Well, again, we created a slider for our guest room floor height. So we're going to link it back to that slider. Now we need a beginning floor name. Again, this is a text string. We're going to put it in quotes. And we're just going to call it floor. I'm going to put a space after that and then close the quote. And then we need a beginning floor number. So we'll start this with the number 1. And then as it creates floors, it'll just be floor 1, floor 2, floor 3, floor 4, etc. And then we need to base it on a floor, and we're just going to link that back to the floor lobby. And that will set up our guest room floors. And we're going to create one more, and this will be the roof. So I'm going to again drag a floor node onto the graph. This again will be create at building. We'll rename it as floor roof. Catalog item again will be floor default. Our owning building will still be building 1. And that floor name will be roof. And again, we'll pin that finished floor elevation input on the graph. And this, now we don't want this one at 0, we actually want this at the top of the building. So we could link this back to our height variable. And now we've completed the 3 floors that we need. I'm going to go back to transactions and I'll record those transactions. Now I'm going to open up the floor manager again. And you'll see now we have the additional building, the GC Hotel. If I expand it, you can see we've got a lobby floor, which has a floor-to-floor height of 25 feet. We've got our guest room floors, which all have a floor-to-floor height of 10 feet. And then the roof floor. So let's close that and just test and make sure everything's working. I'm going to go to my control panel and I'm just going to make some changes here. So let's hold changes so we can easily move the slider, and let's adjust our overall height, maybe down to 120. Maybe we increase the guest room height to 12 feet, and we could even reduce our lobby height a little bit. Let's bring that down to 20 feet. Then we're going to apply those changes. Could record them. And we'll go back and open up that floor manager. And we'll check our building here. We'll notice now the lobby floor-to-floor height is 20 feet. All of our guest room floors are 12 feet, and we're down to 8 floors rather than the 13 we had previously. So now we can quickly and easily modify our floor manager simply using the sliders in our GC model. And now that we have those nodes for the floors, we can actually link our geometry to those floors.